Okay, good morning, everybody. Today we're going to talk about the anatomy of a distro. To distro or not to distro. This is, I've been in the community for 8-9 years now, maybe 10 years, and have never taken the time to do a distribution, never quite understood why I needed to do one unless I was going to build some kind of application that I was going to make available to the community. In which case I was going to have to support that, in which case I decided not to do that. But distros go beyond just putting stuff out for the community. Who am I? You guys, if you were in the intro talk, I'm John Studdard with Achieve, formerly of Big Couch Media Group. So we've been Drupal shop down here in the southeast for about 10 years. Have done quite a bit of stuff on Drupal since Drupal 6, and now have begun to jump into the Drupal 8 world. So what is a distro? So the first thing I wanted to talk about is kind of the different use cases or scenarios that people build Drupal sites from, and then kind of where does a distro or distribution fit in that. So most people, smaller shops and unsophisticated shops like we used to be, do it from scratch every single time. So we, if you're on Pantheon or if you're just building locally, you go and you download the tarball, you put it in a directory, you spin it up on your local environment, and then you either start downloading modules from within Drupal on the install module page, or if you're a little bit savvy, you'll use Drush, and you can start downloading stuff via Drush. But every time you're doing it from scratch, complete, and it can be different every time. And every time you're also grabbing the latest and greatest modules. So even within a difference of a couple months, you might have a different set of module versions that you're dealing with. The next one is what I call from scratch-ish. This is where you may actually take the time to put together like a Drush makefile. So a makefile is really kind of a prescribed set of things you want Drush to do, and it'll go out, and so you'll still spin up core by itself, but then you'll run a Drush makefile against it, and it'll go out and pull down your modules and your themes and turn things on. The next one is if you want to use an install profile. So a selectable install profile with specific site features for a specific purpose allows for complex site setups in fewer steps. All of the functionality of modules may require manual location and downloading of non-core modules and third-party components. But Composer is now offering a new approach to that. So, but in its current state, an install profile is really just a quick and dirty way to get a consistent set of things to happen. And we're going to dive into install profiles here, because install profiles are really just a component of a distribution. And then a distribution itself is really a larger container that includes the install profile as well as pre-configured, full-featured site for a specific purpose. It can be private, organizational, which is kind of what our use case is going to be, or it could be a public one like Open Atrium or Open Public or Open Outreach, those kind of distributions that are pre-canned with a bunch of configuration and content in them already. So installation profile versus a distribution. So like I said, installation profiles, it's kind of a one and done. It runs during installation. Once your site is kind of spun up, you never touch that profile again, and you never do anything with it. And then you kind of are on your own with a kind of a standard site after that. And you add modules and make your changes, but they're independent of the profile, the installation profile. So your commitment is over once you're done. You're not committed to what that installation profile did. You can change things out. You can override the modules that it initially put in, and so forth. And it's intended for quick, consistent up and running with minimal config. So essentially, this is like scripting your setup. Distribution, on the other hand, goes kind of beyond that. So, like I said, a distribution includes your install profile, but it also includes a couple of other things that we'll enumerate here shortly. So it's a complete pre-configured version of Drupal with specific features and a specialized purpose. It requires ongoing support from the contributor and a commitment to updates from the users, or users can get trapped in a frozen distro. Updating of individual modules or core is not recommended. So this is one of the big things that has steered a lot of people away from distros in the past, is because once you kind of make that commitment to a distro, you are locked in. And so you must choose wisely when you pick your distros to make sure it's going to be actively maintained, and that it does, for the most part, everything you want it to do. We've done this in the past from personal experience. We put a couple of clients on the open public distro 4 or 5 years ago, and that distro did have good. It's a phase 2 distro, the same guys who do Open Atrium. It had pretty good support for a little while, but then they went in a completely different direction. They changed out the theming engine that they were using and did some kind of things that required a fair amount of changes to some of the sites we had rolled out on it. And at that point, we essentially abandoned the distro and just started installing our own stuff. The problem is within a distribution, because it's a pre-configured with a certain versions of modules that are part of the installation profile, you can't always just go randomly or willy-nilly updating modules, because there may be dependencies for things within that distribution that require a certain version of a module, or even a patch in a lot of cases. So if you all of a sudden override that patch, or put a new module in, or update the theme, and they had some specific theme things going on, you can find yourself with a broken site pretty quick. Typical use cases, though, it's great for evaluating, demoing, and learning Drupal. In our case, we're going to use it as a standard organizational config, and for specialized applications. You know, some of the ones that are out there, you guys have probably seen the usual suspects. Acquia Drupal, which is primarily for giving a consistent environment. Open Atrium, which is a collaborative kind of project and team platform. Open Public, which is used for municipalities and state governments. Commerce Kickstart is a great example. So if you want to quickly look at Kickstart and see what its capabilities are, or demo it to a client, instead of you spending a week building a demo store, you can download this distribution, spin it up, and it comes with products and checkout and categories and all the kind of whiz-bang cool stuff you need for a commerce site. Panoply and Open Outreach are some more examples. All right, so what are the components of a distro? So a distribution is really made up of 4 main components. So you have core, of course, which is all your PHP code that's coming in from Drupal in Tarball or via Composer. Your installation profile files, which is a directory of 3 files that kind of tell Drupal what to do when it cranks up. Your config directories, and this is where you would store the modules and themes that are going to be packaged along with your distribution. In Drupal 8, now your configuration files, so all your configuration management stuff that defines your blocks and your content types and that type stuff. And then another option with an add-in module called the default content module, cleverly named, is you can also include content that gets sucked in via some JSON objects that can kind of come in and create content for you on the fly. So the installation profile is made up of 3 primary files. So the first file is the profile name.info file, and YML is for YAML, in case you guys aren't familiar with that yet in Drupal 8. But all these are, it's just a new file format. So it defines your distribution name. If the distribution name is provided, Drupal will auto-select it versus just an install profile. So this one key field in the info file is the kind of the trigger that tells Drupal that this is a distribution versus just an install profile. And it also is where it lists and turns on all your dependent modules and themes. So any of the modules you put in there, Drupal will install during the install process, turn them on and get them installed. The second file is the profile file. It can be used to customize the form used during the install process. So think of anything that needs to happen prior to Drupal bootstrapping itself and spinning up, any of the configuration you need to get in place, or any of the intake you need to take question-wise for your install process. So good examples of this are, we used it to modify the time zone to set it to America, New York. We set the country to US, and we did a couple other. So it allows you to default standard answers to questions on the installation process. In our case, we're on Pantheon, so some of the questions we don't need to answer are things like, where's the database, what's the name of it, what's the username and password, but those kind of things you could script into the installation profile. The next one is the install. So this is really where the meat is. Think of the profile.install like the install file associated with a module. It's all the work that needs to be done from a Drupal perspective that you can completely code out. So this is essentially just a module. Its primary purpose is performing actions for setting up the site, enabling some preferences, granting users with permissions, creating users, creating menu shortcuts, building taxonomies, and creating nodes. The difference between the profile install and the profile purposes is much like the difference between module install and the module actual file. So that's kind of, they're kind of synonymous or analogous to what you do when you actually build a module. Think of this is like building a module for Drupal. So the config directories, so you'll see here, this is an example of our distribution is called TPO, or stands short for Trusted Partner Open, which is our distribution. So you'll see here I have my profile, my install, and my info. I actually have another make file here that we were playing around with some of the using Drush to pull some stuff, but we're actually going to move probably away from that and use Composer moving forward. But the other directories here are the config directory, and then within the config directory there's a directory called install, and that's where essentially through the configuration management system you can take an operating site, and if you have everything built the way you want, you can do a config export, grab that directory, and then place it in here, and Drupal will be configured with all of those configurations just as the site that you pulled it from. The modules, this is where you'll store the modules that you want to be kind of packaged with your distribution moving forward. So use this primarily for locking in the modules that you need at particular versions. So if you guys understand how Drupal works, by default it's going to pull modules and run modules from here first. If it doesn't find a module in here, it will actually pull from the bottom. It'll pull from your site directories first. If it doesn't find a module there, but it finds a module here, then it'll use this version. So that gives you the ability, at some point, if you need to override. So if you have a particular client who's using this distribution, but they need a newer version of a particular module, then you would put that down in your sites. I think it's in Drupal 8, the structure is a little bit different now. It's not in sites. It's just in modules, right? So you would just put that in the modules directory, and for that site, you could override what's in the distribution if you need to. But that's usually kind of a bad practice. But it is a possibility if you know what you're doing. And then also this is where the themes are stored. So anything that's in your distribution that's stored in your your install profile directories will be your default stuff, but can be overridden by anything you do at the site level. So default content. What time is it? Did anybody check to see if the rocket went off?
Yeah, well.
Does anybody want to go out and see it?
Yeah.
I don't know if you guys want to take a 5-minute break and go look, or you are.
You want to see it? Yeah, let's go.
Turn your thing off.
Yeah. That's right. We got some steps in at least. So no other sessions got steps in their session. So remember that on your survey cards.
We went for your laptop while you were gone.
Okay, and I'm red again, so I'm recording. All right, so one of the cool things is with the default content module, you can take an existing site. So let's say you've prototyped out what your distribution is going to be. You have an operating version of it. You can install the default content module, and through a series of drush commands, can actually export certain objects with their entity references into JSON. And then you just take those JSON objects and you put them in the appropriate module directories in your distribution. So you actually can, when it spins up, it does whatever is in the install profile, the profile.install file. It does those things first. Then it applies any of the configurations that are in the configuration directories. And then lastly, it'll run anything that it finds here in your default, any default content objects it finds. It will actually go and create those entities or pieces of content for you. So that's kind of the hierarchy of how you kind of assemble things together. All right, so deploying a distro. So how many of you guys use Pantheon? Okay, all right, good. So this is a very specific example of how to do this on Pantheon. If you were doing it just by yourself, say you're a single developer and you wanted your own, you can just keep a local copy of this somewhere and use it to spin things up. On Pantheon, there's a couple of things you have to do to be able to use what they call an upstream or custom distribution. So I'm going to kind of go through that use case a little bit and explain how you go about it. So our scenario is that at Achieve currently we have a proprietary CMS that was developed in 2001, written on Cold Fusion. So if you just let that sink in for a moment, you realize the challenges associated with that. And we have currently probably around 250 nonprofit organizations running on that platform still. So the good news is we got our money out of it, and in most cases our clients got their money out of that investment of being on that platform. But obviously that platform has seen its better days and has no real viable future moving forward on Cold Fusion. So we were deciding how we were going to move forward with that product line. And so a Drupal 8 distribution is what we came up with. It kind of foots the bill for some of the things we need. We needed an easy way to for spin-ups and long-term version control. So in other words, we have a code base that we can maintain moving forward for a long term. Our hope is to get another 10 or 15 years out of this investment. Obviously, we'll probably be into Drupal 9 or 10 by then, but if we commit to this moving forward, that it'll be a sound investment both for us and for our clients. So our solution was to use a Drupal 8 distribution, implement it as a Pantheon custom upstream, and use Pantheon hosting with tight Git integration and rigid developer workflows. So using Pantheon actually kind of forces our hand and allows us to not get away with being a sloppy shop. We have to be able to stay, keep our workflows now that we're going to have lots of hands in the pot, so to speak. An eventual continuous integration via Terminus and Quicksilver. So Terminus and Quicksilver are two utilities that come with the Pantheon platform. Terminus being their command line utility that allows you to do anything against the platform as far as spinning up sites, doing bulk drush commands, doing bulk site updates, those kind of things. And Quicksilver is their webhooks thing that allows you to hook on events that happen on the platform. So as you publish from dev to test, there's an event that fires that you can then hook things to. So you can go out and run a visual regression test against the website to make sure you didn't break any CSS. You can run it through BHAT and run testing scripts against it. You can sanitize databases. So if you have test credit cards in certain tables, you can do those kind of things. You can reset all the passwords. So this is where we're headed, is to have continuous integration as we move our sites through the different environments. So this is our workflow. It looks a little overwhelming at first, but from the process for building upstream repos with Pantheon, it's fairly straightforward once you kind of break it down. So the first thing you do is you create a remote Git repo with common code for your upstream. So in that case, this is our what we're calling TPO head. We essentially have a Bitbucket private repo out there, and what we did is we took we did a Git clone from Pantheon's Drupal 8 installation, brought that down locally, made our changes to it, put our install profile in it, and developed it in a local environment. So that's here. Just assume we're here. We're currently using Kalabox for our local development environments because you can spin up Drupal 8 sites locally via Docker, and it also will integrate with Pantheon and be able to connect to Pantheon and pull sites down via Git. So we spin up a local site called our upstream test. We kind of build out how we want it to do, and this is really just a clone of Pantheon's upstream D8 install. We push it out to our head, and then at that point we have our repo sitting outside of Pantheon, so we can control it, we can do whatever we want to it. Pantheon has a process by which you submit a request for a custom distribution, and then you give them some information. You give them a logo, and you give them access to your remote repo, and they essentially attach that to them, and then they bring it over into the Pantheon environment. So now we have this kind of full connection here where we can maintain our distribution. The nice thing about Pantheon is, if in this instance we now need a new block on the home page in our distribution, and that is a new config file. So we get a config file for our theme. So now there's a new block.config file sitting in here. We push that to here. Pantheon then gets a notification upstream from our head that there's a change. Any sites that we've deployed on the Pantheon platform from this upstream now have a notification that there's a change pending. And we can utilize Pantheon's complete developer workflow and Git integration to push that to one or multiple clients all at the same time if we want through the Terminus. So this is our old trusted partner platform here. So as we have clients that want to migrate to the new system, we're developing a series of exports and migration scripts that essentially will spin up a Drupal site based on our new version of Trusted Partner Open, we're calling it, and then we'll suck in their content off the Cold Fusion systems and marry it up, and we perform a complete migration onto the new platform. So that's kind of the vision of what we're in the process of implementing. Any questions on that at this point?
I have lots of questions. I don't know if you're going to talk through this, but are you I'd be curious what's in your distribution, and then are you doing any sort of open source with it?
We have not decided what we're going to do on open source with it yet. Potentially, we may open source it. There's not really a lot of additional value to it in the open source space, only because it's really just a pre-configured Drupal site to our requirements for our clients. But we may consider doing that, sort of like what Level 10 did with their Open
People can
Enterprise.
learn from it, even if they don't feel like it's something they've used. I think maybe some would, or some would at least look at. I'd be just curious what you put in there. And then the other thing is, you mentioned pushing configuration, but aren't they going to need to split off configuration? Like some sites will have some varied configuration from other sites.
They will. So if there's configuration that we need in the core, in the base install, that's the kind of configuration we'd be talking about. Another scenario is there's a security patch for the views module that we're using, and we need to push that to all 200 sites. So in this case, we would update the views module in our distribution, push it up through, and then it would alert all the sites that we need to pull it in.
But are you using features, or are you just using just the straight up?
So it's kind of I'm going to talk about that in a second. We're going to kind of layer that, how we do it. And a little bit of this is trial and error right now. So, and then in the middle of this, and I'm going to try not to complicate this conversation too much, but in the middle of this, the Drupal community is in a subtle transition to using Composer to kind of pull all these things together. Instead of you manually kind of maintaining your configurations and your what's in there, you use Composer to pull in particular things, and then you let it build stuff on the fly. There's a lot of complexity with how it works with keeping track of that with Git. There's some specific things you need to do as far as how your Git repos keep track of your vendor directories. Certain, like Pantheon, for example, doesn't support Composer running on the server side, so you have to do everything on a local environment and then push it up after it's already been kind of assembled on your local environment. So as we were working down this plan, there's a bit of shifting sands going on right now within the Drupal community. Go ahead.
Yeah. So is this Pantheon 1's platform that you're using? I haven't caught up with them with their.
Yeah, we're Pantheon for agencies is what they call it now. It's essentially the Pantheon 1. Yeah, we have multiple sites under an organization. We have unlimited multi-devs within.
And do you have any comments on how this has worked for you versus like a multi-site, like a direct multi-site instance that, you know?
Yeah, we tried multi-site stuff probably 5 or 6 years ago.
Yeah.
Probably in the latter parts of Drupal 6. Never tried it in Drupal 7. Pantheon has a very strong opinion about multi-site, and we've essentially adapted to that mindset and that bias. So, you know, in this environment, especially in the Pantheon environment, the cost of spinning up another instance of core is minimal from a time and management perspective. So the inherent benefits that, you know, multi-site was espoused really are minimal in a Pantheon environment, and it makes everything so much easier because everything's self-contained now. You can move a site around much easier. It's easier to get it local. You don't get tangled up with all kinds of crazy redirects and DNS issues and stuff like that. So we've adopted that kind of mindset of essentially abandoning Drupal's inherent multi-site functionality. I think you had I don't know if I answered all your questions.
I think you did.
Okay.
Sorry.
So would it be harder or easier if you weren't on Pantheon to do all this?
Technically, I think my opinion is it'd be a little bit harder. You have to be a little bit more savvy in the bowels of Drupal and how to move things around between environments, and potentially if you're because there's really 3 levels of hosting. There's kind of shared hosting out there, so that's your kind of GoDaddy, and you do something locally and you FTP it up, and you just hope for the best. There's the VPS route, where you're kind of in the hosting business a little bit. You're running your own servers and you're running your own configuration. That's usually a little more advanced. And then you go to, so that's kind of Rackspace and AWS, Amazon, Linode, or those kind of vendors. And then you go to somebody like Pantheon or Acquia Cloud, which is an optimized Drupal hosting environment that gives you all kinds of additional goodies, as far as the ability to spin servers up and down, the Git integration, web consoles to do backups and exporting and importing, and so all that kind of very specific things you do in a WordPress or Drupal environment. So that's why we made a decision about 3 years ago to get out of the hosting business. We had about a dozen or so Rackspace servers, and we were spending most of our time patching SSL packages and with Linux, and dorking around with performance tuning on Apache and MySQL, and kind of all this just noise that was not billable time in most cases as an agency. And we wanted to focus on building sites and deploying things quickly. So we took a little bit of initial hit margin-wise on going to the Pantheon platform. It was a little bit higher cost for us, but the cost savings in time and productivity quickly flipped that model around, and we were able to become very proficient on the Pantheon platform. See if there was anything else. So we create a remote Git. We provide Pantheon access to that remote Git repo and link it to your upstream. Then you build all your sites based on your code. So you go into Pantheon. Right now, if you go in there, it has install WordPress, install Drupal 7, install Drupal 8, and then it has a list of other distributions they support. So you can install OpenAtrium or Panoply or whatever. In this case, once you have your distribution, and so in our case it would be called Trusted Partner Open, it'll show up there as an option. We click it, bam, it'll install a site based on our distribution. You make updates to the common code and commit to your repo. Pantheon will sense the changes and provide one-click auto-resolving updates to any sites based on the upstream. And then the bonus here is bulk updates and webhooks can be utilized with Pantheon's Terminus and Quicksilver utilities. Again, we have a kind of a roadmap of being able to add all kinds of easy management. So in its most basic format, we're using the Pantheon console, and say we have 100 sites on that, we'd have to go to each one and say update, 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 update. Through Terminus, we essentially can build our own scripting. Once we've done our regression testing and we are confident that none of our sites are going to break based on what we rolled out, we essentially can go update 100 sites in one script and push everything out. Perform the backups, do the regression test, and promote through the environments, all through scripting. Planning and consideration. So there's some other stuff I just wanted to throw out. And then we'll kind of open this up for questions and conversation. So you can deploy these distributions either private or public or through kind of a community or a partner. So again, if you want to make this publicly available, there's some extra hoops you have to jump through for licensing and configuration for it to go on Drupal.org. So Drupal.org actually has a really nice distribution page that talks about what you can do and what you can't do, and what the specifics are as far as publishing it to Drupal.org. In a private setting, you really can just do whatever you want, which is more what we're initially planning on doing. And then on the community like Pantheon, to become one of their selected distributions that's available for the general public to install on their platform, they have some additional requirements you have to do that are specific to their platform to make it so that it works on the Pantheon platform. So, are you going to support it? Yes. then build a distribution. If you're not going to support it, no. Just use an install profile. Script, essentially, it's a fancy scripting way of getting sites up and running, and then you're kind of off to do whatever you want with it, customized after that, but you're no longer committed to what the install profile did. If you do a distribution, you're committed. That's really the thing you have to think about. And so this is the answer to your question, is we're taking kind of a layered approach. So we originally were thinking, I mean, you could go crazy if you're technically savvy. You can write all this stuff in modules. So you could just write a set of custom modules that goes along with your distribution and does a lot of very specific things. But now with the advent of the configuration management system, a lot of the things that you typically would have done with modules are now available to you as just exporting in the configuration management system. So we will put the basic building blocks of what we need to do out as config in the configuration management system in YAML files. Then kind of the middle tier there is, you may not have some custom functionality, but what we found out is the config files really just config things. They make a content type, or they make a menu, but they don't do things like tying those together, where you may need a combination of configurations that really make some feature or functionality. If you don't want to go if you're using kind of off-the-shelf core components and you're really just tying them together, like an event feature is a good example, or a blog feature, or a news feature. If you're doing the same things over and over again, but you're using just kind of standard config to build those, so you're building a content type, a listing view, a specific node display, and maybe a menu that goes with it, and maybe a security role or something. So but you're using all kind of out of the box Drupal things. That's where features works pretty well for you. So you can have configuration take care of the bits and pieces that it makes at the lowest level, and you can have features take care of what it does from bundling those things together. And then if you need custom functionality where you build your own entities, or you're doing some kind of craziness that you need custom modules for, then that's kind of the layered approach we take. So our initial versions are probably just going to be a combination of configuration YAML files and some lightweight features that kind of bundle together some configurations.
I have another question.
Sure.
Have you taken a look at any, there's a few popular distributions even that you didn't mention, like Aqua Lightning is a big one that they're pushing. There's a Thunder distribution. There's probably others, but have you looked at, well, should we try to take that as a base and extend that at all, or what are your thoughts on that?
So we did kind of consider that, but we wanted to have kind of ultimate control on it, and we didn't want to be dependent on somebody else's maintenance of a platform for our own. What we have done, though, and this is another good example, and this is what we spent a lot of time, is we downloaded those distros and we reverse engineered a lot of what they did. So there's a lot of best practices in there, and we also found that there's a wide variety of ways people did distributions and installation profiles. Some guys did it all as modules. Some guys did it as drush make files. Some guys did it using the native tools leaned heavily more on the native tools. So it all depends on what level you want to override what Drupal's going to do for you out of the box. But that's a great place to start. That's actually what I did first, is I downloaded Lightning. I downloaded, I think one called Vardot. There's a couple good ones out there, and I just downloaded those and just started poking around in those in those profile directories to see how they did things. And I was surprised to see what the kind of variety of ways people do it. The one problem with, there's lots of great, if you're in Drupal 7 environment, there's actually some modules out there that allow you through the UI to build the profiles. So you pick some things and it allows you, and then it outputs a profile for you. None of that exists for Drupal 8 yet. I was surprised the documentation for Drupal 8 is pretty sparse right now. Literally, I found maybe half a dozen blog articles out there that people had written about beyond what's on Drupal.org for Drupal 8 distributions. So there's not a lot of info out there, so it's a lot of trial and error at this point. The other thing I wanted to mention was Composer. So Composer, we were going to wait on maybe a second version of our distribution to do Composer, but it appears, like for example, there's modules out there now that require Composer to even get installed. The address field is a good example in Drupal Commerce. So we're gonna have to deal with it one way or another, and it's kind of, it seems to me, and this is where we're kind of feeling our way through this. It almost feels like it's an all or nothing kind of commitment. Once you kind of commit going the Composer way, that's really how you're going to do things from here on out. Interestingly enough, I listened on the way up. What does this go to? 10:30?
10:30, I think.
Okay.
You have 15 minutes to talk.
Okay. All right. So Mike Anello and his Drupal Easy podcast 191, that he just did in January, early February, was about Composer. So I actually listened to that on the way up here yesterday in my 2-hour drive up from West Palm, and I'm not sure how to characterize it. I would say I did get some valuable information out of that, and I did get the understanding that I probably we need to be doing Composer sooner than later. But other than that, I was left more confused than I was before I listened to the podcast. So the general way to describe this is it's shifting best practices right now, and we're in this kind of precarious spot, calendar-wise, on where the community is and where it's going, and so there is a bit of trial and error going on. But if you take anything else away from this presentation is kind of a snapshot in time of how you would do distributions as of 2 days ago before I listened to that podcast. But I have no clear vision for where it needs to go, probably for another couple months, I think. But that's kind of the takeaway, is if you're really thinking about doing a distribution, you're going to have to invest the time in figuring out how Composer works. You're going to have a local environment to do those things on. You're not going to be able to get away with, spinning up a multi-dev on Pantheon and hoping to never have anything touch your machine. So you're going to have to do the hard work to make your distributions work, which you're pretty much going to have to do anyway. So Q&A, let's see, is there anything else out of it? So, all right, any other kind of questions? Have I covered everything? I realize that you're not going to walk out of here with a definitive way to build a distribution now, but you should have a fundamental understanding of what the components of a distribution are, and what the use cases and scenarios where you would consider doing a distribution. All right, any other questions? All right.
But John, isn't it a problem with Drupal 8 because, even core updates are coming out so frequently?
It is, and that's part of that commitment to maintenance. So when a new core update comes out, you have to put that into your distribution. You're responsible for the testing of all that to make sure that core update didn't break some nook and cranny of your distribution that could have a dire effect on a lot of people who may have installed it. So building a distribution, especially if you're going to share it with the community, is a significant commitment. And that's where we are as an organization. Our desire would be to share this eventually, but we wouldn't want to share it in any half-baked kind of way. We want to share it in a way that we would be confident in the quality and the consistency of what's going out there, and we have the resources to make the commitment to keep it maintained for anybody who chooses to use it. Yes, sir.
It's actually a little in the hallway though, but getting out of a distribution that's kind of basically migration from one site to the other.
I was gonna.
Is there a way to slowly pick it out, like you said, it would pick up modules in your your modules folder. You can slowly replace everything.
So you can, let me say, for the cleanest way to do it is what you said, is really just a migration to a new site. You spin up a new Drupal site and you migrate things over either with migrate modules or by hand to get things over, to get out of that distribution. The hacky way to kind of do it in the short term is that you can take the risk of starting to start doing your own updates in your sites directory to override what's in the distribution profile directories. But that's at your own risk.
Yeah.
And it can bite you, because a lot of times, Open Atrium is a great example. There are a lot of very specific modules and even patches or extensions of modules that Phase 2 has done to get that feature set the way they want it to work. So it's a combination of contrib modules, maybe some custom patching on those contrib modules, and then a full suite of custom modules that they use to implement that. So it's this kind of layered approach that they have. So when you start, so say they have a particular version of CTools in there that solves a problem for them, and their patch is not in the latest version, and you go and install CTools, and now you've got a white screen of death on your distribution. And you're going to spend a lot of time troubleshooting that. Yes, as a Panoply user, do you have any comments?
Yes. Well, currently we're having an issue with the media module having a security patch out there, and the distribution not upgrading the module. How do we handle that?
Well, you can do a couple things. So you can, if you need it out there, you can test in your RA environment on these guys are on Acquia. You can test it in that environment. Go ahead and update it. But you're going to need to test the crap out of it to make sure that it doesn't blow up all the places it uses it. Then you can roll that out, and then if there's another update to Panoply in the future, you could then remove that from your sites directory and use the version. If they come current with you, you can just essentially kill the sites version.
Have you checked to make sure there isn't a monopoly update?
Yes, I
It's
have.
probably the best supported distribution in the Drupal industry.
I've been keeping an eye for like 2-3 weeks that they haven't built the distribution.
Well, you should-
Patch out there, but it's not tested and it hasn't been built yet.
So you could shoot an email, with the weight of your.
Light a fire.
Well, I mean, you could send an email out to, I think it's Matt Cheney is the guy who maintains it at Pantheon. He's pretty accessible. You could tell him, say, listen, hey, we're a big site running on this, and at least you could get some kind of time frame from him, and then that would tell you whether you want to go ahead and override it temporarily to get the security patch to your live environments, and then you can back it out later when the distribution catches up with the patch, the security patch.
Pantheon support's coming from some guy in the Midwest.
Oh, for Panoply? Okay.
He sort of took it over. And
Did he? Okay.
I want to say Ryan, but I can't remember. It's been a while.
Question? Yes, sir.
I was just saying, there's two very helpful tools for this. One is the hack module. If you install that, it'll tell you if a distribution has quote-unquote hacked one of their modules and apply a patch or something. And another very helpful tool is the registry rebuild module. So for both cases, if you wanted to fully decouple from the distribution, you can pick up and just move the module out of their profile into your site's all modules folder, run registry rebuild to tell the system it lives over here now. And then there's also I think it's called the profile switcher. Once you moved everything out of the profile, you can say, I want to switch to the standard profile. Then you're essentially off distro.
Another tool that's useful for that, it isn't a tool, is every distribution has a makefile that's a requirement by Drupal. And if you look at the makefile, and all the patches are listed, so you see a whole list of patches, you know what
Yeah,
you're going to be doing.
that was one thing I didn't show you guys. I was going to show you is what the install profile. I'm sorry, what the info file. The info file here lists whatever you put in here in the info file. is what Drupal's going to turn on during, but you have to make sure that you have these guys in that contrib modules directory under your install. So, but this is a poor man's way of getting stuff turned on without having to do a fancy makefile and all that stuff.
Well, the makefile tends to pull the code in. So
Yeah.
if it's package.drupal.org, there's a drupal.org makefile
It allows you to.
that shows the patches and everything in it, and that's been really useful.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks everybody.
Thanks, Sean.